You ever have that feeling of being overloaded, even when nothing is actually, wrong? It's like this constant low-grade hum of pressure. We're all taught to think of stress as a feeling, right? Something psychological. But what if it's not? What if stress is a system response, one that's being constantly tweaked and calibrated by the very rooms we live and work in? Okay, let's get into this. We're going to explore the invisible physics of how your environment is actively rewiring your stress system, a lot of times without you even noticing.
This right here? This is our signal for today. Just let that sink in for a second. Cognitive burnout isn't a personal failure. It's not a lack of willpower. It begins as an architectural problem. So what we're going to do here is pull that idea apart. We're going to dissect this invisible mechanism and show you exactly how the design of your space, both the physical one and the digital one, is imposing this hidden cognitive load on you. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we're going to spot the repeating pattern. You'll see it everywhere once you know what to look for. Then, we'll deconstruct the invisible load into its three core parts. After that, we'll look at the cumulative cost, what happens when we ignore these forces. And finally, we'll talk about the architect's edge, which is really a whole new mental model for thinking about this. Right, let's start here. This is not just about your cluttered desk or your messy kitchen. This is a universal principle. When you start looking at environments where performance is absolutely critical, you see the exact same patterns emerging over and over. You see how intentional design can either shield our focus or completely sabotage it. Think about this for a second. The difference between a surgical theater and a chaotic emergency room. A surgical theater is what you'd call intentionally signal sparse. Every single tool has a designated place, and every possible distraction is systematically engineered out. It's built from the ground up to lower cognitive load. Now, contrast that with a chaotic ER. That's a storm of high-stimulus overload. The environment itself is screaming for attention, forcing doctors to triage not just their patients, but the very information coming at them. Here's another one, an aircraft cockpit. It's an absolute masterclass in designing for low cognitive friction. Every button, every dial is placed to minimize the mental energy it takes to do the job. And now, contrast that with the average cluttered digital desktop. It's a minefield, right? A mess of notifications, disorganized files, and dozens of open tabs. This creates a massive navigational load where just finding the thing you need becomes the main task, and it drains your mental battery before you even start the real work. Okay, so we can see the pattern, but what are the actual forces at play here? Let's deconstruct the physics of this environmental stress. It turns out there are three primary invisible loads that are constantly working on your cognitive system.
These are the big three. First, you've got visual load, which is basically clutter. Second, there's sensory load, which comes from things like noise and light. And third, navigational load. That's the friction that's created by just plain poor design. Let's dig into each one.
All right, let's talk about visual load. Here's the thing. Your brain doesn't just see a messy desk and label it messy. It sees a field of unresolved stimuli. And each one of those objects creates what's called an unclosed cognitive loop. It's like a tiny unfinished task that your brain feels this nagging urge to track. That stack of mail, do I need to deal with it? What's that book over there for? Your brain is constantly, subconsciously, running these little micro-appraisals. So the key takeaway is this. Every single object in your line of sight becomes a low-grade decision request. It forces your brain into this state of constant attentional triage, deciding what to look at, what to ignore, and this isn't an emotional thing, it's a cognitive process. The sheer volume of all these competing stimuli, it leads directly to faster mental fatigue, even if the work you're actually doing isn't all that hard. Okay, next up is sensory load. And this one is even more insidious because it completely bypasses your conscious mind. Unpredictable sensory inputs, a phone buzzing, a notification sound, harsh fluorescent lighting, they put your body into what's called micro-defense mode. It's this low-level physiological state of heightened alertness, and it's driven by our ancient, primal need to scan our environment for threats. And this is how we know the stress here is biochemical, not just psychological. Irregular noises force your brain into these constant little orienting responses, always asking, what was that? Is that a threat? Harsh lighting can disrupt your body's natural circadian rhythms and elevate alertness hormones like cortisol. And notice, the real driver of this load isn't how complex your work is, it's the sensory unpredictability of the world around you. And finally, let's look at navigational load. You can also call this interface friction. This is basically the mental tax you pay every single time the design of a space forces you to take unnecessary steps. You know the feeling? When you can't find a file or a tool or that one setting. At that moment, your task is no longer execution. It's become a search problem.
I mean, think about it. Every extra click, every moment you spend hunting for a misplaced folder, it increases your decision latency. All those tabs and notifications force you into constant context switching, which we know is incredibly draining. The absolute best environments are designed to pre-decide the routine paths for you. They offload that work from your brain so you can focus on what actually matters. Poor design, on the other hand, just multiplies your cognitive effort.
So, we have these three invisible loads: visual, sensory, and navigational, constantly acting on us. And over time, they don't just disappear. They add up. They accumulate. And now we're going to look at the cumulative cost, that point where these invisible pressures finally become very, very visible failures. You know, burnout, breakdown, snapping under pressure, it almost never happens all at once. It's the slow, steady drip of these environmental loads, which we then misinterpret day after day as some kind of personal inadequacy.
And this, right here, this is the heart of the problem. We feel the strain. We feel the fatigue, the brain fog. And what do we tell ourselves? I just need more discipline, or I guess I'm not resilient enough. We take the friction from our environment, we internalize it, and we slap a label on it that says personal flaw. But it's not you. It's the system you're being forced to operate within. And who's most vulnerable to this? Well, it's often the most driven people. It's the high performers who just keep pushing through, slowly eroding their own capacity. It's leaders who find themselves becoming more and more reactive because their cognitive bandwidth is completely maxed out. It's professionals who've been trained to believe that feeling exhausted is the same as being productive. It's a trap, and it's literally built into the architecture of our modern work lives.
So what's the way out of this? It's not about trying harder. It's about thinking differently. And that brings us to our last section, the architect's edge. This is all about making a shift in your mindset, from being a reactor who just endures their environment to becoming an architect who actively shapes it.
Just look at the contrast between these two mindsets. The reactor is always asking, how do I endure this? They believe that focus is purely a matter of willpower, and to them, stress is just something that needs to be managed. But the architect asks a totally different question. What is this environment demanding of me? They see their attention as a finite resource, something to be architected and protected. For them, stress isn't a feeling to manage, it's a signal. It's data about a faulty system.
So the most crucial point is this. The real edge doesn't come from some new morning routine or another productivity hack. It comes from a fundamental cognitive shift. It's about learning how to correctly interpret the signals that your body and your mind are sending you about your environment, and then acting on that data like an architect, not like a victim. To help you start making that shift, I want to leave you with 3 final questions. Don't try to answer them quickly, just let them sit with you for a bit. First, what in your space, your physical space, your digital space, what feels heavy? Second, what are the specific things that drain your attention during the day? I'm not talking about the big projects. I mean the small, recurring frictions. And finally, maybe the most important question of all. What is one single thing you could remove from your environment right now to reduce the load? Because real resilience doesn't start with adding more. It starts by strategically taking away.